Hi, I'm Ernest Ward, and this is Strathmore Artist Paper's Back to Basics workshop. We're going to be using the graphite pencils again this week that we started working with last week. We're also going to be using the white vinyl eraser. However, I'm going to introduce one optional material for you today, and that is a water-soluble graphite pencil. The regular pencils are waterproof when they go onto the paper. The water-soluble ones have a binder in the graphite that actually is water-soluble, as the name implies, and allow you to do wash effects, which I'll be demonstrating a little bit later in the film. For today's exercise, we're going to use the Strathmore Artist Paper Series 200 Skills paper, mixed media. The mixed media is a heavier weight paper, that is, it's a thicker paper than what we used in last week's exercises, either the drawing or sketching paper, and as the name implies, is equally well suited to dry media such as graphite pencil and that sort of thing, but also does a pretty good job as with wet medium. A review of one of the things that I mentioned last week was that the pencil is basically a linear tool. In fact, for artistic purposes, we can define line as the path of a pencil across the sheet of paper. The line was an excellent tool last week when we were conveying shape. This week, however, we want to convey form or volume, and we do that through tone shifts. So what we're going to do today is first establish our shapes, and then we're going to work on replacing the tone, or rather the line that we have here, with the two lighter tones on either side of it, with a tone shift, one light and one dark, or it could be the other way around. In this case, the first technique I'm going to show you is one that Leonardo da Vinci used some 500 years ago. It's a hatching system. We simply place the pencil on the line that we're wanting to replace, and we simply create a series of hatches. This can be as open or closed as you want it. That is, there can be as much or little white showing in between these hatches as you want to have. I'm also creating a degree of gradation by placing a little bit more pressure on the pencil when I first start the line, and then lifting the pencil off as I go. I can also go back and add to that if I want to have additional form, or tone rather, and if I want to modify the uniformity of that tone. And now we have, instead of the line, we have a tone shift. The one thing that you want to be careful about when you're doing your initial line shape drawing in this type of thing is you want to keep those lines, the initial line that I mentioned, the initial line, dark enough that you can see it, but light enough that it will then blend in. A darker line, we'll start here, let's go over here, make a darker line. The darker line, it will require a heavier pressure and therefore a darker tone to get that line to blend in and to become about tone rather than about shape. A faster way to introduce tone into your drawing is to use a stroke in both directions. So for example, if I take the pencil and I move it back and forth like this, I can fill in the paper twice as fast as I can with the one direction tone. The only problem with this is that we have difficulty in maintaining an edge if we do it freehand like this. There's a little trick though that some artists will use if they want to establish or maintain a particular edge, and that is to use the fingernail. So if I, for example, simply put my fingernail on that line, and as I put in that tone with my right hand, I trace that line with my fingernail, you'll notice that it's much easier to maintain that edge. One of the drawbacks to either of the first two techniques that I've shown you so far today is that there's still a linear quality to it. For example, the one that I showed you that Leonardo da Vinci used, easy to distinguish the individual lines that make up this tone. Even with our more continuous tone and the thumbnail technique, we still have a rather linear surface here. So what we can do is moderate this through the use of a simple tool, in this case the Q-tip. By simply taking the Q-tip and moving perpendicular with a light pressure, moving perpendicular to the direction of the lines, we can take some of the graphite from each of the individual lines and we can transfer it over in between them. We can also, if we're careful about it, soften the outside edge of it so we can actually create gradations. Again, if need be, use your fingernail to control that edge and make sure that you don't accidentally move the graphite over into the light side of the edge. The result is a much more uniform tone throughout. Working with the water-soluble pencils, you begin just as you would with any other graphite pencil, drawing linear marks, and hatching can be used to create the tone shift. Go back over it to increase the amount of graphite and to also create gradations if you want to do that. But where this tool really comes into its own is after you've put the graphite pencil down, switching over to a watercolor, or in this case a water brush. Start outside the area of the graphite and gradually move in towards your edge. The result is astounding. For today's lesson, I've chosen a simple ceramic pot as our subject. I've supplemented our natural light that comes through the blinds on the left with a studio spotlight above and to the left. This gives us some really nice highlights. We have 3 strong highlights, 2 in the front and 1 on the back of the rim, and we have a nice cast shadow. I'm also using light, natural light through one of the blinds that's behind me and to my left, and that gives us a slightly bluish secondary highlight here, and it also gives us the blue fill in this area. In order to get the full roundness to the form, I want to avoid having solid shadow in the shadow areas over on this side and everything. So what I've done here is I've simply taken a piece of Kleenex tissue, draped it over a box so that it takes the spotlight that's coming from the upper left and reflects that back into the edge right along here. You'll notice that our core shadows are down in the area that's farthest away from the light source, both down here and also in the cavity, the interior of the ceramic pot, over on the side that is closest to the light source. This is the interior that's turned away most from the light and therefore is the darkest. And notice that there's a gradation that comes out here over in this area right here. We pick up just a little bit of light that's being bounced into the interior there. Okay, that's it for our setup. We'll go ahead and get started now. We begin today's drawing in the exact same way that we started our drawing in lesson 1, which is to establish the parameters of the drawing and the orientation of our paper. I've actually used a view catcher like I did last week, and although the vase, actually the ceramic pot, is taller than it is wide, I want to actually incorporate the cast shadow. And since the cast shadow is actually longer than the pot is tall, I'm going to use the paper in a horizontal format. Again, I start by marking very lightly, dark enough that I can see it, but light enough that I can make corrections to it. I'm marking the overall parameters of the pot. I'm checking the horizontal measurement against the vertical measurement. And then finding that in my drawing. And then I'm going to very lightly block in the overall position and the general shape. And checking the back position of the shadow. Since the light source rather is just forward of the vase, there's a slight diagonal tilt. There's also a curve because of the curve of the vase itself. Before we progress any farther on today's drawing, I thought I'd take just a moment to talk about ovals. A lot of people have difficulties with ovals, so we'll focus on that part of the drawing for just a moment. An oval, of course, in this case, is actually describing a circle seen from an angle or foreshortened angle. Most ovals, if they're incorrect, if you feel intuitively that there's an error within the oval, there probably is. Go with your intuition. You have a whole lifetime of experience looking at objects, and you have that filed away in your memory. So if you intuitively feel that there's something about it that's wrong, assume that there is and start trying to determine what it is that's wrong and correct it. The problem that most artists, when they first begin, run into is that if they draw one, they don't like it, they erase the whole thing, and then they draw it over, and they find themselves getting into a vicious cycle of drawing, erasing, drawing, erasing. Very, very rarely is the entire oval incorrect. So what you want to do is determine what parts work, what parts don't work, correct the parts that don't work, keep the ones that do, and move on. An easy way to do that, or one way of approaching it, is to first start off by lightly drawing a horizontal line through your oval. Keep this light because eventually you're going to want to erase it or replace it with a tonality, and otherwise get rid of it. The next thing that you want to do is you want to find the halfway point within your oval and draw vertical. And then you want to compare each one of those quarters of the oval with your actual subject. If it works, leave it alone. If it doesn't work, change it. Things that you're looking for, this measurement, the upper half of your oval should be identical to the lower half. This half, the left half, should be identical to the right half. So you make corrections to that. This curve should be a mirror reflection of this curve. This curve should also be a mirror reflection of this curve, this one of this one, and this one of this one. And if we carry it even further, this one should be a mirror of that one and this one of this. So we're going to go through and we're going to make corrections to it. We can check the measurement of this against here. If it needs to be corrected, we can do that. And that gives us our starting point, our oval, the line that we can then start working the tone into. Now if you've kept the marks of the horizontal and vertical centers light enough, they may not even be necessary that you erase that, because we can simply blend that tone in. If it doesn't blend in, not a problem. We can simply go back in with our eraser and make the corrections that way. Remember to observe that since the light source is coming from the upper left, that the left side is going to be darker, that is the left side of the interior, and it'll lighten up as it goes over onto the other side. Okay, with that, let's return to the overall drawing.